Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome all of you here today. Today, we will start with our first lecture in our series of virtual lectures and talks that Bahrain Authority of Culture and Antiquities host via Zoom platform to shed light on the latest archaeological excavation carried out in Bahrain in the recent time. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our distinguished speaker today, who is going to talk to us about the recent archaeological research by the British-Bahraini team on Muharraq. He will shed light on a very important period in the history of Bahrain, especially the Christianity and beginning of Islam, in addition to more topics that he will deal with. Our distinguished speaker is Professor Timothy Insel. He is an archaeologist and Al-Qasimi Professor of African and Islamic Archaeology in the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies, IAIS, in the University of Exeter in United Kingdom. His research interests are in later African archaeology, Iron Age, and global Islamic archaeology. He is the director of the Center for Islamic Archaeology, CFIA, in the same Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies in Exeter, which he founded. I'm talking about Center of Islamic Archaeology, is founded by Professor Timothy Insel in 2017. He has more than 30 years of field work experience in Africa, Asia, and India, and in the Middle East, having completed field research in Tanzania, Mali, Eritrea, India, and of course in Bahrain, especially in Bilad al-Qadim and Muharraq. He started doing his excavation and research in Bahrain archaeology, especially Islamic period, I think since 2001. So he published a lot of papers and publications about the Islamic archaeology in Bahrain and other different countries in the world. If I try to list all of these publications, I will take a long time. So now I think it's time to give you the floor, Professor Timothy Insel. Please.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'll just see if I can share this properly. Now, I need you to tell me if you can hear me.
Yeah, we hear.
And if you can see me as well.
We hear and we see.
Okay, good. I just want to get rid of these videos at the side. Okay, so as Dr. Salman has already said, today the lecture I've called Recent Archaeological Research by the British-Bahraini team on Muharraq. And it's a great honor to be able to do the first of these lectures in this very interesting series that has been organized. Would it be possible for me to ask for the person to turn off the sounds, the beeping that's done when anyone joins or leaves the lecture? Would that be possible? That would be very kind if they could just mute that. That would be great.
We will see with our IT.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah, it's done.
Done. Thank you.
Okay, so as Dr. Salman has said, this research that I'm going to talk about today forms part of the early Islamic Bahrain project. And this has been running since 2001, so he was quite right about the date. And I have to say that none of it could have been undertaken without the very generous support of His Royal Highness Sheikh Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, who of course is the Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Bahrain. And his support has been very generous indeed because of his interest, particularly in Islamic archaeology. And again, as Dr. Salman said, our previous research has primarily before Muharraq been on Bilad al-Qadim. Now, I apologize for those of you that know the geography of Bahrain very well, but I feel that it's important that I do have maps here for those that don't know it that well. So this, of course, is Bilad al-Qadim that you can see here. And the focus of the lecture is on the island of Muharraq to the northeast of Awal, the main island. And we've had many outcomes from the early Islamic Bahrain project. So, for example, there have been 3 books published, numerous articles, and also one of the most tangible outcomes is the museum, which His Royal Highness kindly funded, and which was opened in January 2017. You can see it here, and I hope that you will get the chance to visit it, the Al Khamis Mosque Visitor Centre and Museum. And the Muharraq excavations that I'll be talking about today, or the investigations, have been running since 2017. And I also need to make the point that it's very much a partnership project. Though I might be giving the lecture today, it's research that is completed in partnership with Dr. Salman Al-Mahari, with Professor Rob Carter, and also with Dr. Rachel McLean. So it is partnership research. It's not purely all my ideas or all my work. And I'll refer to other individuals who've contributed as we proceed. Now, the 4 main aims of the Muharraq research, and indeed of the lecture today, the short lecture today, are to investigate the evidence for the Christian presence in the Deir Samahij area that you can see on the map here, and also the implications of this for the wider history of the Gulf as well. Also to examine the late antique to early Islamic transition in Muharraq Town, so down here on the map. And this, of course, the first evidence for this, I have to say, was found by Rob Carter and by his collaborator Naranjo Santana in about 2010, 2011. So we're building on their work there. The third aim is to look at the 18th to early 20th century mercantile activity and life also in Muharraq Town, so down here again, and then to sort of broaden out the narrative to look at how the Muharraq evidence fits into the overall settlement pattern in Bahrain as well. Now, it's been long thought that there were early Christian communities in northern Muharraq, so this area here. A clue, for example, in the name Al-Dair or Dair, which of course means monastery or cloister. There are arguments, I'm not a specialist in this, as to what it means in Aramaic. Also, the name of the village Samahij here, we can see here, which has been the focus of our research, is possibly also derived from the names Meshmahig or Mashmahig that you can see here, which was a Christian bishop seat, an episcopal seat that's referred to in various historical sources, ranging in date from 410 to 697. And you can see the different bishoprics and important sites here in one of the maps from Rob Carter's paper on Christianity in the Gulf from 2010. And then you can see Meshmahig here. So one of the sources, or 2 of the sources, for example, that refer to this Meshmahig or Mashmahig, that could be Samahij, are the synods, are the records of the Nestorian Church, which is also referred to as the Church of the East now, more properly named as that, which were written in 410 and 576 CE. Now, local information suggested that there was a tangible presence, a former Christian presence in the village of Samahij. So we've seen the name background, and that this was represented by this large mound that you can see here, covered in people, in the center of the village cemetery. Now, a trial excavation of this mound, this is a drone photograph of our excavations, but a previous trial excavation of this mound was done by a team from the Bahrain Authority for Culture and Antiquities. And this delimited some traces of walls, which is very interesting, but the results were generally inconclusive. There was no date, and there was no real understanding of what these walls related to. So in 2019, just before the COVID pandemic unfortunately put a stop to all sorts of research activities, we completed a month's excavations on this mound and were able to delimit 2 buildings that you can see here. The yellow outline relates to an abandoned mosque or shrine, which those of you who have been there will have seen on the top. And this dates, according to the villagers, from about maximum 300 years ago. And then beneath this, a much larger building with multiple rooms, as you can see here, which I've numbered, outlined in red, which measures some 17.85 meters on this length axis here and 10 meters here. So a very substantial building was uncovered during our excavations. And you can see dotted around here, these are the modern or more recent graves, which of course we didn't disturb. We concentrated on this mound in the center here. I wanted to make that point as well. So the partial plan that we've delimited, so forget the yellow building, we're just concentrating on the red building here, is composed of 4 small rooms, 1, 5, 4, 3, and 1 long room. And this is suggestive that this is part of a large, possibly a monastery, certainly a multifunctional building. And you're only seeing part of it here. You can see that the wall is extending out here. There's a wall here, and there's almost certainly a lot of material under here as well. So we would like to extend to the maximum extent that we can this November without disturbing the graves in order to get more of the plan of this building. And we can find parallels for this structure here that's outlined in red. And I put a few parallels together in this plan on the left-hand side. And a close parallel for the type of structural complex is this church at Al-Qusur in Kuwait, where church A1, you can see here, has a central nave here. This is the nave of the church, flanked by 2 aisles, which is possibly matched by here, which is one of the aisles, here, which is possibly another of the aisles, and then room 4, if it's not a complete room, we don't know here yet, is possibly the nave as well. Okay, and I put in plans of other churches that have been excavated in the Gulf region. So you've got Sir Bani Yas in the United Arab Emirates. We've got Karg Island in Iran. This is our building here in Samahij and Muharraq, and then Akaz in Kuwait, another church in Kuwait here. But those of you that are keen-eyed will immediately note that the key difference is in orientation. That this building, also this building is slightly differently oriented, but this building, the black building is the one we're talking about underneath here, is a different orientation. It's facing in a different direction to the church buildings of the other church buildings in the Gulf, which are usually oriented a few degrees off east-west. Here is north with the arrow here. So this suggests to us that what we're looking at here, even though I've already drawn parallels with one church, is not in fact a church, that it's possibly part of a much larger complex that may include a church, but is more likely a monastery, which was a religious community inhabited by usually religious male individuals. And that this room here, this long room, could in fact be a refectory, a dining room for the monks, which you would find in a monastery up until the present day in different parts of the world where Christianity continues. Now, certainly the surviving architecture of the building in Samahij indicates that it was very well finished. So you can see here, for example, there were niches in the building, niches perhaps that had wooden shelves in for storage. This long room, the refectory, the possible refectory room, you can see various marks in the plaster. It's got well plastered walls. These were possibly where wooden fittings had been put in, chairs or tables or benches or shelves, and those themselves have disappeared, but the marks where they were fitted into the walls are still there. There was substantial architectural ornamentation, plasterwork. This is a piece that's collapsed down, it's face down, but you can clearly see it's got stepped plasterwork on it. There's ornate stucco work, fragments that I'll show you in another slide in a few minutes' time. And there are also elaborate doorways. Here you can see one with a stone threshold here. This is the entrance into that refectory room, and also stone surrounds around the doors as well. This is where it's been destroyed down to this level. So we've still got a lot more of this to uncover. Now, although the Samahij building appears not to be a church, there are certainly indicators of Christian identity. And you can see this here, various indicators. So we've got the cross-painted sherd here. There's a cross-painted sherd here. This has got a clear cross indicator on it. What type of ware it is, Rob Carter's unsure, so he's given it a broad derivation, but it's of the right date. It's 6th to 8th centuries, and I'll talk a little bit about the date later on. It could be part of the yellow glaze family. It could be Coptic glazed ware. It could be Hijazi ware. We're not sure, but it's an indicator of a Christian identity. This limestone block that you can see here, it's eroded, but it has on it possible traces of a cross. You can see that here as well. And then also this sherd from a torpedo jar, which was a large storage vessel, possibly for holding liquids of various sorts. On it is what has been tentatively identified as a Syriac inscription. You can make out various letters here, and I've put in a Syriac alphabet here, and it possibly has the letters Het or Heth or Kapf and Dalet or Daleth on here, and you can see that there. So we have clear indicators of the Christian identity for this building. Could I just check that you can hear me okay still, because I'm just talking to a blank screen at the moment. Could someone confirm they can hear me, Dr. Salman?
Yes, clearly.
Oh, good. Very good. Thank you very much. Also, the stucco work, I said there's elaborate stucco work. Stucco work is molded plaster work, as you can see here. These are various fragments that we found inside the monastery building. They're very similar to pieces of stucco work from the monastery at Karg Island, one of the Iranian islands on the opposite side of the Arabian Gulf. So, for example, I've highlighted similarities. This pointed central boss here is very like this fragment here from Samahij. This roundel edging that you can see here is very like this roundel edging from Karg Island here. And then this stepped pyramid design that you can see here. I think I've got it up the wrong way in this photograph, but you get the idea. You can see it here is very similar as well. And again, it's showing how well finished this building was, that people have invested time and resources in this building. And it's not unique. I haven't got time to be able to show you other examples of similarity, but Langfeldt's paper on the churches of Eastern Saudi Arabia, for example, around Tarut and Dammam. The church at Jubail in Saudi Arabia, 5th to 9th century, gives it a very broad dating range. You get the similar roundel edging as well, the same as this there. So we've got that as an indicator of this link with Christianity. Within the building, there are various other categories of material. I would refer you, we've published the results of this first season. They're available open access in the journal Arabian Archaeology and Epigraphy that you can get off my academia site, for example. So I would welcome you to read that. So the full details of the other material are there, but this includes, for example, glasswares. And these are composed of, for example, small bottles, small bowls, flasks, and also the stem of a wine glass. These people were drinking wine in this monastery as well. And they all together constitute what St. John Simpson at the British Museum in London has defined, an expert in this material, as a Sasanian assemblage. So, you know, a pre-Islamic Eastern assemblage of glassware. We've got metals, we've got these coins that need cleaning. They may be inscribed, we don't know. They may have inscriptions on them, which would be very interesting. Once they're cleaned, we'll be able to tell that. There's marine shell. You can see all sorts of marine shell. It was being worked. These are the backs that have been cut off cowrie shells here, so they could be strung together. This has been cut as well, possibly to be used in ornamentation. And this marine shell is from, I'm very interested in marine shell in other contexts, and this is from a wide range of sources. So number 10, this Cypria manita down here, this cowrie shell could be from the Gulf of Oman. Number 9, this could be from the Gulf of Oman, rather confusing way I've done it. Number 10 could be from the southeastern Gulf, while Oliva bulbosa, number 7 here, which has become discolored, could be from the southeastern Gulf or could be for the Red Sea as well. And this number 9 shell rather here could also be indicative of Indian Ocean contacts. So there were connections evident in the archaeological material. It was not an isolated monastery, and I'll return to that point too later on. The marine shell also indicates how much the sea was part of the life of the inhabitants. And this is also shown to us by the small assemblage of faunal remains that so far been analysed. Our zooarchaeologist, Dr. Jane Gastro, is looking at this. The remains from Samahij are largely from marine fish. So these people were eating a large quantity of fish, showing their connection to the sea and to the sea as an economic resource as well. And you can see just how much the disconnection with the sea from Samahij has occurred very recently. If this photograph is from 1996, here is the building I'm talking about, the monastery complex. There's the sea just there. There's a pier jutting out to it. You can see land reclamation starting. So in 2005, it's still connected to the sea, but this area here has become infilled, or this is infilled. And then by 2007, there's the building there. All the access to the sea has been removed by the land reclamation here. So what this means is if you visit the site now, like the archaeologists, like we've had to do, you have to use your imagination in order to be able to think and feel how the inhabitants might have felt about the sea and how close it was at that point, you know, a millennium and a half ago, and which existed until 1996, this proximity to the sea, but which has now been lost. Now, I said I'd say something about the dating. The ceramic assemblage, which has been analysed by Professor Rob Carter, dates from between the mid-6th to 8th centuries CE. I won't bore you with the details, but these are the sorts of ware types that one would expect to be there. Almost certainly, it would appear that the building at Samahij can be identified with this bishopric of Mashmahig, which is a very exciting and rare coincidence of the historical and the archaeological narratives. More often that doesn't occur. And what's even more exciting is in the Bahrain context, it's not unique. in 2019, we also found another Christian building. This is across from it, in another location in the island, which I'm not yet allowed to tell you where that is for security reasons, but I hope to soon be able to investigate it, at least to be able to survey it and to be able to publish something on this. And that is even more intact, this building. It's very exciting indeed. So we've got two, not just one, but two possible, one definite and one other probable Christian complex on the island. And then the Samahij building was abandoned in the 8th century, presumably because what had occurred is that these people had converted to Islam. Christianity was no longer important to them. And this again would link in with the historical narratives that I will talk about later on. Now, we're not yet in a position to place Samahij within the history of Christianity in the Gulf. This is still early stages. It's just one season of excavations, and there are different sites. I've referred to, there's Kargil, and I was talking about that earlier, Al-Qasr, Akaz, and Sirbani Yas, all the sites that I mentioned to. But on this map should be added, and I should have added it in also, Samahij, which now, of course, has been identified archaeologically, so it fits on this map. But as the research progressed, we will be able to say more about how this community here fits into the overall narrative of archaeology, Christian archaeology in the Gulf. But it's very evident that this community was not isolated. So we've got ceramics, for example, from southern Iraq and from neighboring regions of Iran. We've got that yellow glaze family pottery, or the Coptic wares or the Hijazi wares that were either from, depending on what they are, were either from Syria, from Egypt, or from northwestern Arabia. So we've got this area linked in. We've also got glass from southern Iraq. And as I've said, we've got marine shell from various sources. So from the southeastern Gulf, from around here, if I can get my cursor back, so around here, then the Gulf of Oman, so around here, but also from the Indian Ocean and from the Red Sea as well. So we're beginning to be able to reconstruct this pre-Islamic, these all-important pre-Islamic contacts that we then see much more fully in the Islamic period. And all this material also holds implications into Christian contact based on the archaeological evidence as well. By the 8th century, what we can say is that settlement was also established in Muharraq Town. And this was first identified by Rob Carter and by Naranja Santana by their excavations. So, for example, their excavations in the romantically named site of the Muhammad bin Faris car park, it yielded material indicating this occupation at this date. There were two superimposed, two buildings on top of each other of late 7th to 8th to mid 8th century date. There are ceramics of the 7th to 8th centuries, but missing the earlier 6th century ceramics that we found here. And these would include all those sorts of wares that I put there. And also importantly, radiocarbon dates. So like here, we're looking at the ceramics, but we're also using the radiocarbon dates to be able to build up a precise chronology. And that's what's required in order to be able to reconstruct the minutiae, the little elements of settlement history that contribute to the overall narrative that we're aiming to look at. And our excavations in 27 in Muharraq Town, initially we had 3 units that were excavated in the vicinity of where Robert Carter's excavations previously were. And these units found mixed assemblages. So there were 7th to 8th century material mixed in with 19th to 20th century material. And you've got the European later porcelain here, which will be familiar from ceramics these days, and then the earlier Islamic ceramics here, much earlier ceramics here, mixed together. Okay, they were mixed together, but that's still important because they were indicating that there was a background of early Islamic occupation in this area down here and confirming Carter's earlier results. And what this indicated was that there had been a shift here also of the seashore. So the earlier seashore, this early Islamic seashore, was around about here. And then subsequently, there had been land reclamation down here. And the coastline had gradually moved to the west because of the land reclamation. So the coastline has shifted over this way, much further over here, because of land reclamation. So this provided confirmation for that. Another of the activities that we've done in Muharraq Town is to assess the extent of the early Islamic occupation. Okay, we might have it as a band around here, as I showed in the last map, but we're finding that it was stretching across a large area. So this tells us that it was a substantial settlement in the 7th to 8th centuries in this region down here. And we did this by opening a series of 5 2x2 test meters that we excavated down to either the natural or the water table, where we couldn't excavate any further. And it demarcated that the settlement area was about 500 meters east to west. You can see from Ebu, the unit Ebu here, through to Sal here, the Sheikh Salman house, the outside of which we're excavating in the car park here. And that's about 500 meters or so in diameter that we've got there. And what we found again is the same mixing of materials, but also that there was an absence, and this is important for thinking about the overall settlement narrative on Bahrain, is that there was an absence of material from all these units, as there was in Samahij as well, for any occupation between the 9th to 10th to 18th centuries. So clearly, though we have the pre-Islamic, the 6th to 8th, then we have the 7th to 9th, the 7th to 8th early Islamic, then we have a gap, and then we have the 18th, 19th, 20th coming in later on in time. Now, the deposits were mixed in 4 of the units that we were looking at there, as I was talking about. We've got the same 7th to 8th and 19th to 20th century mix of ceramics, but there was the exception in one of the units, which was MUH3 or Muharraq 3 that you can see here, where at a depth of 3 meters down, here we've got 2 of our archaeological assistants, Nathan Anderson and Hannah Parsons Morgan, excavating at the base of this unit, we found in situ early Islamic material of 7th century date. And what we found were the sorts of sherds that we would expect for that period that you can see here. On a stone floor, you can see some of, maybe you can see some of the stone slabs behind them as they're working backwards. And these sherds were mixed in with, again, marine shell and also fragments of bitumen that may have been used to waterproof baskets or used in constructing boats or something like that, or mending boats, we're not entirely sure. But this layer had also been disturbed by water action. Water had been running across this floor. So unfortunately, in this context, though the ceramics were not mixed, they were of the right date, the radiocarbon dates were wrong. So the radiocarbon date that we got back dated to the early 1st millennium BC, which is obviously far too early. And also another key indicator that there had been water action here was that the ceramics were very abraded by water. They'd been mixed by water, which was showing us that this site had had this water flowing over it, but it was still an unmixed ceramic layer. So this is an important result from that unit. So it differed from the other units in that respect. And the other important result from this unit was that we got sherds of, in this early Islamic layer, of what are East African style pottery. So the first African style pottery, and I say style pottery because the clay that these what are called Tana tradition or triangular incised wares were made from is a local clay, it seems, but the decoration patterns on it, these triangular patterns that you can see here and here, are characteristic of pottery that was made on the Swahili coast of Tanzania and Kenya. So it may have been a person that came or people that came from that area to Bahrain for whatever reason, as slaves or free people, we don't know. But then they started making pottery with local clay there in motifs that they were used to. And we would call these types of wares colono wares. And this was one of 7 sherds of African pottery that we found in that 2018 season. And since then, the numbers have expanded. And these African ceramics are the focus of research PhD study by Awit Tekli Himanot Araya, who's looking at this material for his PhD. And it's beginning to show us again that we've got these important contacts that were evident in the Christian period, if I can put it like that, and they're now evident in the early Islamic period as well, which were archaeologically missing before. And these ceramics, African ceramics, complement this very amazing artifact that's on a display in the Soot Music House in Muharraq, which is a carved peg, a piece of an elephant ivory tusk. It could be African, it could be Indian. I would suggest it's probably African. But in the next phase of research, what we're going to do is to analyze this, because you can tell from the composition whether it's an African or an Indian fragment. And this would again show us these burgeoning these burgeoning commercial contacts that are ongoing at this point in time. And this piece was from Carter's excavations. So exciting material for long distance contacts. What came out the 2019 season in our excavations in the Muharraq Town was also another, we extended that unit I just showed you where Nathan and Hannah were working at the base, 3 meters down. They were working in this corner here. We extended to a much larger area excavation. And at the end of our 2019 excavations, we found another area adjacent to this that may indicate further in situ, in place, early Islamic material of 7th to 8th century date. And this is very exciting indeed. I can't say positively, but possibly this is what it's indicating. If you look here, I don't know how good your resolution is, but you can see that there is a clean layer of yellow sand. And what this seems to do is to show a break between the later 18th, 19th, 20th century material, which is represented by all this modern rubbish up here, and then below maybe the early Islamic. So if you invite me back to give another lecture in a couple of years, I'll be able to confirm whether or not this is the early Islamic material. And if you look here, you can see that there's a large cluster of broken potsherds, and these seem to be of those types that we're getting both in Samahij and mixed in the early Islamic layers from the so-called torpedo jars, those storage jars, and also other forms of storage jars that are referred to as large incised storage vessels that are broken in situ here. But as I say, we don't definitely know this, but we will know after the excavations in November this year, assuming that they go ahead, which I really do hope that they do. The results of the 2019 excavations also lengthen the upper chronology. You can see here, we've got nice in situ, you can see all the different layers of occupation here. We've got nice evidence now of the 18th to 19th century occupation with various features in here. We've got part of a plaster wall that was over, plaster floor, sorry, that was over here. We've got a kitchen area here. This is the earliest possible early Islamic material here. This is part of the trough that's associated with the kitchen area here. You'd have seen it in the last image. I'm sorry I didn't refer to it. This is a stone-lined pit, probably part of an oven that you can see here. And local residents who still had memories of this particular area, they came around and said, yes, we remember the houses here. And these were located around a well, which we found, which had been infilled with rubbish, including modern rubbish at the top. It was called Ain Habab. So we've got an important and rich assemblage of material of 18th to 20th century at the top that will show us in great detail the commerce and the life of Muharraq Town in this period through to the early 20th century. And then possibly a break in occupation. And then possibly below that, we've got that 7th to 8th century. So we've got those missing centuries there again, showing when Muharraq wasn't as important. And I'll return to why that was so in a couple of minutes' time. Now, the focus of this research on the 18th to 20th century material will be by a new PhD study by Samantha Dobson at the University of Exeter. And we're very grateful to a University of Exeter alumni, Mr. David Higgins, who is funding this PhD in Exeter. And Samantha will be looking at the evidence for this period, in particular, the very rich assemblages of glass and of jewelry and of metal objects and ceramics and beads that were excavated there, and also the architectural fragments that came out of the excavations. And these excavations were done by Rachel McLean, Alicia Hernandez-Roble, and also by Hannah Parsons Morgan, with fantastic results. This is from another unit. This is a piece of architectural plasterwork of 18th, 19th century date, again showing that these were very elaborate structures, indeed, as we can see if we go and visit some of the historical monuments. And this was also a picture that was reinforced or first shown by Carter's excavations of the waterfront warehouse complexes of the Al-Fakro and Al-Doy families. This is a photograph from 1958, which shows the proximity of the sea here. Of course, there's been much more substantial reclamation since then, and the sea has been pushed further out. And this is now underneath and forms part of the Pearling Site Museum. But we can't say a great deal about this 18th, 19th century occupation because this awaits future research. We've got the material sitting there in our project lab room in the Bahrain National Museum, which Samantha and others will be looking at. So again, as I say, in a few years' time, if you invite me back, I can say more about this, as indeed we'll be able to, all the students that are working on this material or will be working on this material too. But what we can begin to do is to begin to say something about how this evidence fits in, how this Muharraq evidence fits into our overall understanding of settlement patterns in Bahrain. So what we can say, first of all, is in Muharraq so far, we're missing evidence for certainly between the 12th to 18th century. We don't know the extent of settlement there. There appears to be a gap there. It may only have been village level settlement. It appears to lack major settlements on Muharraq. And these appear to have been on Awal instead. And we've been able to reconstruct over the years where these different major settlements were. So between, for example, the 9th to 13th, 14th century, the main settlement appears to have been in Bilad al-Qadim, as represented by this photograph of our excavations there in 2001, where I worked with Mustafa Salman, who's giving one of the later lectures in this series, and Rob Carter and many others. And then after this, between the 13th to late 16th centuries, we see the main focus of settlement. There was, of course, other settlements. I'm not saying there were only these settlements, but the main settlement then in the 13th to 16th centuries was around Kalat al-Bahrain, and represented here by this photograph from the Danish excavations in the 1950s and 1960s, in particular, the work by Karen Freifeld. But what's interesting here is on Awal is that we lack those 6th to 8th century ceramics. So the earliest Islamic occupation is on Muharraq, and then we see the shift to here. And then after the occupation here, perhaps up into the 18th century, we see again the shift back to Muharraq Town and the prominence of Muharraq Town as the center of pearl industry, for example, in the 19th century. So we're beginning to be able to reconstruct this big picture of settlement in Bahrain. And the next step beyond that will be to project, and I hope another project that we're developing, into the wider narrative of where this fits within the overall Gulf and the Indian Ocean beyond. And I hope to say more about that soon, about this particular project. Now, what's very interesting is that from those early 7th to 8th century levels on Muharraq, but remembering how small they are, the in situ levels, we don't yet have any evidence indicating a Muslim presence. We don't have any coins, we don't have any mosques, we don't have any burials, we don't have any seals, we don't have any inscribed potsherds, probably because we've only got such small areas that we've been looking at. So currently the earliest evidence that we have for Islamic presence is on Awal, as represented by this sherd, this inscribed sherd here that has the beginnings of the Basmala on it. That's 9th to 10th century, and that's from the Al-Hassan Mosque mound in Bilad al-Qadim that you can see here. It's one of a range of inscribed sherds that we found. Or if you believe the origins that this Al-Khamis Mosque was Umayyad in date, then that would form the earliest evidence. Though I would say that we don't support that narrative based on the archaeology, because all the recent excavations, including these massive excavations that found the ablutions well, if you've been to the museum, I hope you've been to the museum, you'll have seen that this has changed radically. The well is here that we've discovered now. There was no evidence for any of these Umayyad or 7th to 8th century sherds, however you want to describe them. And the extant building, the standing building, is of course 12th to 13th century in date. However, historical sources, as is well known, indicate early conversion to Islam in Bahrain. And we're not challenging that. We're just saying we haven't yet found the evidence yet. And we know that significant conversion occurred after the Prophet Muhammad was sent a letter to the Bahrain governor, Al-Munthir bin Sawa al-Tamimi, in either 620 or 621. I apologize for that. And the monastery in Samahij, interestingly, was abandoned in the 8th century, so about shortly after the point in time that we're talking about as well. And I would argue that it's very likely that the first evidence that we have for Islam in Bahrain is going to turn up in our excavations in Muharraq, either at this site here or in Muharraq Town. So we're very excited about the possibility of our excavations in November. And I just put this image in here because, again, it's the drone photograph, but it's the one without the color alteration and without the lines drawn on it. So you can clearly here see the extent of our excavation. Sorry, I should have added a scale in as well. I will do that for next time. I was in a little bit of a rush. But anyway, it gives you an idea of what the site looks like from the air. So in conclusion, as you can see, I just outlined very much research in progress, but the beginnings that are raising all sorts of very interesting questions. And I think you'll agree with me that we've got remarkable archaeological evidence that's emerging from Muharraq. What we can see is, for example, that there is a Christian community in existence for some years after initial conversion to Islam, it would appear, and then they convert to Islam. That early Islamic occupation is largely in Muharraq. Then we see a shift to Awal, and then in the 19th century, perhaps the 18th century, back to Muharraq as the main center of settlement. And the further excavation, which we very much hope will take place in November 2021, I'm going out to Bahrain in a week's time in order to make the arrangements for this, will provide more examples. And what we're particularly interested in finding is this earliest evidence for Islam, either in the 7th or the 8th century. So thank you very much for listening today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Timothy Ensel, for this fruitful lecture and for the presentation that you've given to give us a close look in the clear idea on the results of your research in Muharraq Island, which is really, we believe it's a potential island. The whole Muharraq Island is a potential for archaeology. Deserve to, for more work to be done there in Muharraq related to archaeological studies. Thank you so much for this. And you conclude everything at the end, so no need to repeat what you said. I will open the floor for questions. If there is any questions or for discussion, we have a few minutes for this.
If there are any questions, the raise hand feature.
No questions? It's okay.
Yeah, Zia, no questions?
No
okay.
questions so far.
Dr. Robert Carter. Please, Rob.
You're muted.
Give Zia.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, thanks for that, Tim. That was great. I was just wondering about the other mounds at Samahij, because the ones that we excavated, you excavated with your team, is just one of, if you like, a string of raised ground. You know the site much better than me, and I've never really looked around the other mounds. Do you think there's potential for more archaeology, more monastic archaeology or Christian archaeology to lie beneath the cemetery in the center of Samahij?
I think yes, most certainly that those mounds are very interesting indeed. And yes, almost certainly that they contain relevant archaeology underneath them. Whether it's Christian or whether it's early Islamic or whether it's later, we don't know without investigation, as you're saying. The issue there, of course, is that this is an active village cemetery. So there is no way that we can investigate those mounds without there's no way that I would ever do that without the consensus of the community and without detailed negotiations, because they have human burials on them. So I think it's probably unlikely that we'll ever be able to do anything there. We might be able to, but this is very much in the hands of Baka. It's a Bahraini decision, and in, of course, the Samahij village community as well. In terms of looking at the material on the surface, it's got the sorts of things that you like, as you're aware, turquoise glaze and torpedo and all those sorts of things that you and Nick Tate specialize in. So yeah, I think that I would love to, of course, but we've got the other exciting site that I'm not allowed to tell you where it is, that I hope is going to, well, it will certainly prove very, very interesting indeed. So
I wanted to ask if you're able to tell us any more about that as well, actually. I mean, I know you can't say too much, and you certainly can't talk about the location, but did you say there's a building there?
There's a building complex there.
Right.
It's multiple different buildings and mounds as well. It's not been developed or touched at all. Fantastic. And this cross-carved slab, and considering how built up Bahrain is, it's absolutely amazing to see this untouched landscape. I can't say where it is, but I think people can guess. But yes, yeah. So I
That's
hope
wonderful.
Soon. Yes.
Yeah. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Eliazia, there is more questions or?
I don't see any raised hands.
Okay. Okay. Yusuf Khalid.
Yes, hello, Yusuf Khalid from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Professor Ensel, for such a wonderful presentation. My question relates to whether we should expect any evidence of the repurposing of religious structures, whether the Christian structures, there's any evidence that they were repurposed from pre-Christian structures, or whether we should expect relate to re-Islamic repurposing of those structures?
That's an excellent question. And I think that the answer to it is it's a distinct possibility that the Christian structure could repurpose an earlier structure. We know that there were certain privileged locations, usually centered around wells like Barbar Temple and Ain Abu Zaidan in Bilad al-Qadim. Yes, so that's a possibility. And then again, it's a distinct possibility that the Christian building was repurposed into, parts of it may have been repurposed into a mosque, for example, or some other form of structure, we don't know. Well, that's the key point, we don't yet know, but I think that's a very astute observation of yours, and it's something that we will certainly be looking at. Yes, so thank you for that.
Okay, I think time's out now. On behalf of Bahrain Authority of Culture and Antiquities, we'd like to thank you very much, Professor Timothy Insel, for the information given by you, for your time. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in Bahrain to complete your excavation and resume your work again. Thank you very much, and thank you for all of our guests, the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you in the next lecture. Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you again. Bye-bye. Ilyazi and Fadwa, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
شكرا.